Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you today. My name's Mike Rowan. I'm the Associate Director of Communications at Chorus America. This is Rising Voices, Black Voices Matter, our series on conversations delving into diversity, equity, inclusion in the choral field and what we can all do to make meaningful change there. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Alex Blake. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Doing well, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you. Anything real briefly on your mind or anything about you that you want to share?
Sure. Well, excited to be doing another one of these podcasts, and certainly excited to have with us our guest who we'll introduce in a second. Um, and I'm excited to see more of some videos that have been in programming that has talked about diversity, equity, inclusion. We've certainly been seeing a lot more of those possibilities. So it's exciting to see those conversations turn into real action. So excited to see that continue.
Yep. Awesome. And you're right. We have two absolutely fantastic guests with us today. So joining us is composer Joel Thompson. Hi, Joel. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. And composer Moira Smiley. Hi, Moira. How are you?
Hi, Mike. It's nice to be here. I'm well.
That's so wonderful. I'm so happy to be talking with you both today, and just wanted to start out with acknowledgement that we'll dive into some conversations that might have difficult topics to address, and just want to start out with some affirmation and appreciation to all of the work that's being done by the people on this interview, and to all of you who are tuning in to engage with these issues. So Joel, to go back to you, I've been really moved deeply by your work. I think it's really inspiring and necessary, and acknowledging that it has been difficult to share and that process of putting it out there. So I want to say thank you for that, and just want to let you talk a little bit about yourself or any projects that have any meaning to you, or just what's on your mind as a choral leader these days.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm currently doing my doctorate, my DMA at Yale School of Music, and I've been trying to balance that while being in a pandemic and having a busy writing schedule, as we all are, and with varying success. Tackling emails and all of that, it's a little overwhelming, and I tend to sort of get paralyzed. But I look forward to conversations like this because I really get energized from just communing with fellow music makers and reminding myself that I'm not alone in this endeavor. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely, there's a lot of us that are right here with you. And Maura, um, your personality and what you bring to your music is so special. Like sort of you said off air, you sort of have this combination of a little bit of like top 40 personality to the choral world, while also speaking to social justice issues so eloquently, and it's just been part of the fabric of so many choruses. So I really appreciate that, and would love to hear from you what's on your mind and what you've been working on lately.
Thank you. I feel like I am sitting in 2020 with a lot of humility, a lot of curiosity. And I am currently sitting in Vermont, which is a place I moved to kind of recently from Los Angeles. And it's very, very cold. And I'm finding a way to make life online and to stay feeling connected. And the way that I'm doing that the most is making an album with 4 other singers and making videos and preparing the release of this album of music that is, I guess these are arrangements that feel like really full representations of what I want to say and how I want to say it and who I want to say it with. And so that's sort of the joy of the moment, is how to make meaningful art and commit to it to such a deep level that I feel proud of it, you know, looking backwards and forwards.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And just, want to say that all of our voices are appreciated and so necessary to talk about these things, and to acknowledge right now I'm feeling excited. But as we dig in, if I get to moments that challenge me or make me feel uncomfortable, I'm going to do my best to fight through those, and stay engaged, and stay open, if those come about in this conversation. I hope everybody will also do that. And with that, Alex, I wanted to throw it over to you and kind of give you the floor to get us started with this conversation about composing and social justice music, and how those two things relate, and really get us started.
Sure. Well, I'll echo being so honored to have both of you here with us, Jill and Maura. Um, Certainly composers that have worked with us for years now with Tonality, and have done pieces that really, I think, in different ways, but very important ways, have really given us the words and the music to speak to these issues, how we interact in these issues, and really how we are just better people to each other. I think both of you do that so beautifully in your work. So I just want to thank you personally for that. And I would love to start by asking both of you, Joel, you can start, and then Maura, you can follow up, but just how do you all see yourselves right now as composers? And I'm speaking more, I mean, certainly you can mention the pandemic, but how do you see your place within composition right now as we deal with some of these issues that have certainly taken the forefront, specifically issues about justice and equity in terms of racial identity, or really any marginalized identity that brings you passion right now?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't think that I see myself any differently. I'm forever a student. I've just trying to remain as honest and vulnerable as I have been. I know that there's this idea that because I have done it a lot with my music, talking about things that I care about that happen to correlate to these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that somehow there's a lot of expertise in that. But each piece that I write is really an opportunity for learning about myself and looking inward. And I think it's through, excavating the personal that I find or happen upon universal truths, or truths that at least apply to our present moment. And so I see myself as someone willing to speak to that, willing to offer the same vulnerability that I feel that my pieces do, to facilitate these conversations, so that we do have a more equitable present and future, than it was when I started this whole endeavor of composition. And so that's really how I see myself. I want to see a lot of change in organizations, in educational institutions, but really I want to see all the changes happen on a personal level first. And I know I can start with me. And I really connect to what Mike did, where he sort of demonstrated what he would like our audience to do when encountering these issues of discomfort that will, happen in the course of this conversation, by saying that he's going to fight through it and still stay engaged. He's offering that invitation for our listeners to do the same. And I think that's essentially what I'm trying to do with composition. This is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm feeling. I hope you join me. Yeah.
Thank you. And Maura, I feel like when in the middle of all of the unrest, especially after the murder of George Floyd, I remember, receiving a lot of questions and a lot of, people asking what to do. And I think one day I just posted, "Sing about it." And I said, "Look here first, be the words in this song. And then we can talk if you have any follow-up questions." I mean, really, I feel like you spell out so beautifully what it means when you're not directly affected, but you are affected. How you take those uncomfortable situations and really use that to learn, all on top of beautiful music.
Yeah. I mean, what Joel was just saying to me, thank you, Alex. That was an incredible honor. And what Joel was saying was a lot of what I wanted to say as well, which is, as we all go forward as musicians who, I say we're love junkies. We just love to be around love and to create a sense of connection while we're in this situation in which there needs to be change, in which there is so much change because of, everything that's going on in our world, that we stay specific. We stay, we keep listening to that discomfort. We keep listening to the granularity of our own experience, and keep showing up. And I think that is, that comes out in many ways. It comes out in the melodies I choose to write. It means that I may not sit down and write something quickly these days. It means being patient, and it means listening in a way. And I would pause to say that the words of "Sing About It" were me saying, oh, there it is again, that deep discomfort and rage at injustice being everywhere and surrounding me and confounding me. And so I feel that song still stands. But I say, in that verse, in the second verse, I'm going to look up from my own concerns and reach across, right? And that's a hard thing to do when you are busy and trying to make a living and you're in this go, go, go kind of society. And so I think part of our job, I feel like part of my job, is to write music that allows people to step away for a minute, from that sense of, I don't know what it is. It's like a capitalist drive, just to step away and go, I can make change. I can respond to injustice on a personal level. Yeah.
And thank you. I think both of you speak so beautifully around these issues in ways where, to me, it's so evident that you have been engaging in these conversations for a while, which is important. I think a lot of people were hit in some ways extremely for the first time. That was compounded on, I think, more what you mentioned, the capitalist kind of mentality of just perpetual motion was halted by our current situation. And so I think a lot of people were not able to escape in the regular habitual ways of life and had to really sit. for the first time, I think, in such an intense way. And I think, both of your music in so many ways really speaks to how to engage, how to stay, how to realize that it is us, it is all of us, and yet it is also, we are within the system. So we have responsibility to make change within our own environment, without blame or guilt. I feel like that's where your music speaks so powerfully. Joel, you mentioned some of this already in terms of where you have seen, or especially when you entered, where you have seen kind of where our world is in terms of the choral world, in terms of their efforts in DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So I'd like to ask both of you kind of where you have seen, maybe even where are things that what are things that you would like to see improve and change even from here?
I think I like to think before I speak, but I'm, that's not the nature of this conversation. So I'm just going to process out loud. But I think what I'd like to see is, I've seen a lot of conversations surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. But one thing that I think needs to be added to this conversation, and sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, is this particular ingredient that will allow the others to stick, and it's the sense of belonging. And these spaces, we're trying to make them more equitable, we're trying to make them more diverse, we're trying to make them more inclusive. But when we open the doors to people who have been historically marginalized, it will not remain diverse, it will not remain equitable, it will not remain inclusive if they don't feel as if they belong. And I've been grappling with my own sense of belonging in this genre of music, in which the music of the suffering of my ancestors is used as a bonbon at the end of a choral concert. When I hear "Soon I Will Be Done with the Troubles of the World" as a closer, without any other music, idiomatic or non-idiomatic, made by people like me in a choral setting, it proves that there's a lack of connection, a lack of understanding of the Black experience in this country, and how those inequities can be quite painful when present in the choral setting. I think that has changed, quite a bit since at least I was an undergrad, when it was a common phenomenon. I think people are aware and having these conversations, that's fixing those small, small, in quotes, microaggressions and whatnot. But I think right now we are sitting with a lot of discomfort. I think because I think everyone's uncomfortable. I think there's this myth that right now it's just white people that are uncomfortable. But when you are used to being on the margins and all of a sudden you're in the center, you're uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. And I think because we are human beings and we don't like the feeling of discomfort, if we let things stay as they are, we will all tend towards where we are most comfortable. For me, it was the margins. For you, it might be the center. In order to prevent that reflexive action, radical change must happen. Radical in that We have never seen it before. Radical in that it is going to make all of us uncomfortable. Radical in that we won't want to do it because it will make us uncomfortable. And we haven't seen anything like it. And I think the key to doing that is focusing the sense of making sure everyone belongs, regardless of, you know, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, you know. Yeah. So I think that's what I want to see the conversation go towards. That radical space is where I think art lives. And so we are actually very suited to be a model to the rest of the world for what an equitable future in this country will look like. So.
Thank you. We certainly will. If I was not a co-host, I'd be screaming. We would, because there, yeah, the comfort even in marginalization is a nuance I do not think is being talked about. And I think, you know, as you said, that discomfort's coming from all sides. Like you said, as some of us and you know, I've seen you're speaking of what some other speakers of color suddenly have a microphone the size of which they have never seen in the past couple of years.
Right.
And, you know, how you step up to the plate immediately as if, you know, you were destined for this time of destruction, which I mean, just is just so scary to think about. But, you know, yeah, I think it's certainly, that is a whole conversation. And, you know,
Yeah.
as well-intentioned as we want to be to give voices, how not to overload in our intention and understanding that, you know, while people have been screaming to talk and to yell, to suddenly give them the stage is also its own, you know, internal struggle.
Yeah.
Moira, what have you seen? What would you like to see?
I loved what Joel was saying about belonging. It actually brought up this well of tears just thinking about the way that I guess it's society at large silently disincludes so many people. And I don't want to talk about politics specifically. We have just come from an election in this conversation. And I feel like what I keep bringing to this, and I haven't turned this thing. So for Joel's belonging, I bring this. I want my failure and my constant wish to come out of that failure with something new, something radical, something that really does make change. That's what I want to belong. And so I guess it's that sense of failure or falling, that I'm falling all the time, falling and failing and falling, and then get up. You know, that's what I need as a woman who is white, and as a woman who is given voice, or who is asked what she thinks. I think it's important that other people know that I also feel that process. There isn't, I haven't wrapped it in a nice bow at all. I'm in the process of figuring out how to be effective, because I've seen failure as a person also coming from a liberal side of things. I've seen failure over and over when people make nice, when people make it sweet, and myself included. And so I guess I have to look head on at storytelling too. I think this is a really interesting new place for me is, can I tell compelling enough stories about this failure and this rising, that I bring people with me who want to listen or who may not want to listen.
More what you said about us being love junkies is true, but also like all of the feelings, like we feel all of the feels. And so
Yeah.
I I feel at least that like white people are very used to being sensitive and like trying to avoid criticism, um
Yeah.
where like you're saying like that can be okay, maybe it won't go well all of the time, but you know, if we can still include this sense of belonging, you know, when there are mistakes. And I wonder, I mean, you may be able to disagree or add to this comment that you know, look, when you say everyone belongs, that might include folks who are struggling with, you know, some sort of like lessons, who, you know, like I'm speaking mostly of white people who, you know, have some experience yet to go in sort of processing experiences other than their own.
Can I just say that as a white person, I think that my Black and trans and gay and lesbian and so many other of my colleagues have lived for so long not being, just accepting that they're not seen and that they are not included, really, that they're sort of tacitly or silently, again, disincluded. And I think in a way a person who is um, sort of centered, I guess, a person who is centered usually has to learn how to not be at the center. But what that means is being that this conversation that that you're hearing isn't about you, and you don't know what those experiences are. And so you are sort of disincluded until you learn. And I guess this sense of staying on the side in a way is so rich. It's and I guess I'm not saying anything new. I guess I'm just feeling that in the resonance of your words, Mike.
I think in order to come into this space in which we are trying to change this field for the better, one can't hold opinions or ideologies that directly oppose my humanity and expect to be centered. White supremacy directly opposes my humanity, and in all forms. Many of the and it's really insidious in that way because it's sort of embedded its way into the way things are done. And so that when Black artists and musicians point at the vestiges of white supremacy and many times the bedrock of what we do in classical music and say this is an example of white supremacy, it's going to immediately make one who is steeped in this tradition, has a deep love of it, to feel, and who is white, to feel unmoored in a way. But we are envisioning a genre of music making that is detached from that bedrock of white supremacy, in which all of us can come with our full humanities and be seen and be heard. And if one is not willing to buy into that, you're not ready to be led into the space, perhaps. I think at the same time, I want to be careful because in order to, many times in activist circles, we end up just inverting the hierarchy that we're fighting against. We end up saying, you know, like, we end up inverting the hierarchy we're fighting against. And I think what is more radical, what is more revolutionary, is seeing how wide the door is, how we've been instructed to line up in a single line to get through this door, when we can all just hold hands and walk through the door at the same time. Like, why don't we just walk through this very wide door? Why are we fighting and jostling for a position in the line, in a straight line, when the door is, you know, miles wide? We in this profession, in this choral music space, we might not be, I don't think we don't have any arrogance or hubris to think that we can change the world, but we can change the world if we just hold hands and walk through the door and show, like, this is how it's done. You know, this is how an equitable existence, where we are all seen and heard and valued, is done. And I think in order to engage in this conversation and make it happen, you have to be willing to hold my hand. If you're not willing to hold my hand, then you're trying to make this line a single line through the wide door. Yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but those are my responses to your words, Mike.
I love the mile wide door analogy. You know, when I have heard these conversations, the same kind of analogy has been used to a table. And there has been a set finite amount of seats at the table, when really the table was always positioned and destined and formed to fit everyone.
Yeah.
But in order to glam up this table, we have made it exclusive, and we have sold VIP tickets to this dinner. And we've done that for so long, and then it starts to seem as if that dinner was only set for those people. Many of us in our community have certainly seen examples of people certainly resisting the notion of this mild wide door. And I think especially among those most privileged in classical music and choral composition, white males, there certainly have been a couple who have pronounced their identities and the danger of those identities being shaken up by this new interest, passion, understanding of equity, and how that might seem as a danger to their work as artists. And I would love to hear from both of you. What would you say to someone who's grappling with that question?
I have a personal sort of specific response to that idea of not being sure, A, that you should do as much work at the moment. And I guess what I would say, I wanted to say that in this world where I am stepping back and opening my eyes, I still have to work, and I still have to, put food on the table. And what comes to me is that when I open myself to this, whatever is unprecedented, and I ally myself and I think of myself as expanding, as becoming adjacent to something really exciting, which I feel this new, choral music with new composers. I already feel this even as a white woman of a certain age, that there are 20 somethings that are doing really cool, interesting work that I wouldn't do because I'm not a 20 something. And so I'm already thinking of, how do I become adjacent to this? How do I expand and sort of send my tentacles towards this new set of values? And in that, I start to relax and feel a sense of belonging again. And I think that is so important. Joel, I love this word of, I sometimes think of life as this ping pong between longing, where you feel outside of, and belonging, where you feel inside of, right? And that's the sort of spiritual push and pull that allows change. And so I feel right now in this moment that I am longing. I am longing. And I think this is good. This is scary, and this is good.
Yeah, I would encourage one that has that question to watch one of the best, my favorite videos on YouTube. It's a conversation between James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. And one of the gems that Baldwin says in the course of that interview is, the minute an artist thinks that they're a success, they're done. Maya Angelou's, nods in agreement, basically saying you start writing to replicate that previous success. But James Baldwin clarifies, he's talking about the artist. The minute the artist thinks that they're a success, they're done. I think what I get from that is exactly what Moira was just saying about that ping pong between longing and belonging. I really love that metaphor. I think one can only start asking that question if they're in a spot of stasis, of not moving, of not longing, not being in motion. These trying situations are ones that cause us to move, and we just have to choose which direction that we're going to move in. I think standing still shouldn't be an option. Although I understand fear can sometimes lead to paralysis, which is understandable, but I think I would encourage that person to turn that fear into wonder. Another favorite dichotomy that I like to explore in my music is fear and wonder, and turning the side of the coin over to wonder and moving towards rather than away from, or staying still in paralysis, I think is the solution.
You mentioned more like, how does my music, how does my art touch what is popular? And to me, I feel like in some ways that's also freeing in a sense, because it takes your ego out of the equation.
Yeah.
Like, how does your music touch people?
Yeah.
No matter what the mirror reflects, how does your music touch people? And I think, some of us have been able to assume, have had the privilege to assume that our music automatically touches people because we write it. And it's really, there have been so many systems in place that have kind of led to that perpetual belief. And so now that those facades are being, washed away in this time, it might be a humbling and then freeing opportunity to really just engage with why you chose to write in the first place. And going back to that place, as opposed to what you expected to get, what success you expected to get from your endeavors, but just what are you hoping to do? That transcends to me identity and privilege and marginalization. Your efforts to engage and connect and inspire and encourage through your music. Like that, if that stays central, that's where the table is. That's what the table was set up for. That's why the door is open. Joel and Moira, I certainly would love for you to kind of if you had any kind of last summarizing thoughts about, I think, Mike, to answer your question, really all of these identities, composers, programmers. I mean, some of these issues that we have talked about are certainly can be spoken to many different components of what we do as choral artists. But kind of how do people move forward in this time right now where we are seeing a lot of changes of identity and changes of where people have seen themselves? And how do we continue to move forward?
Well, I think for me, what allows me to refocus is my love of the music. I think everyone who has become a musician has experienced a transcendent moment in their connection with music as a listener, as a performer, just as a community member engaged in music. We've had that moment where music has allowed us to transcend so many boundaries or just emotionally. And rather than thinking of oneself as I'd like to think of myself as an evangelist of that transcendence. You know, like, this thing moved me so much. I have to share the gospel, the good news of music making, and making it with a community, because choirs are inherently communities. They're little communities. And so there's nothing like the magic of making music with the community. And if one can focus on the joy, on the endless possibilities that come with that, you know, idea of making music, you let go of yourself, and you focus on this object that brings you so much joy and its power to create community around it. In that community that this music creates, we want it to be as equitable as possible. We want everyone to feel as if they belong. What can I do as an evangelist of this thing that I love so much? What can I do to make the community that bonds around this music more equitable? You start asking yourselves these questions. You start saying, you know, as I have in the past, you know, maybe I'm not the right person for this commission. Have you considered this other artist who happens to be a Black woman and would probably fit, you know, this commission a little better? You start thinking, what poetry should I set? How can I be more honest about the music that I'm making? For me, I'm asking myself, can I include the rhythms of my childhood, the music that moves my soul, in classical music and still have it be considered classical music? Can I be me, and still create a transcendent moment that creates community around it? It all sounds a woo-woo, but I think these are the questions that I'm asking myself, and that I hope other, you know, fellow creators are asking themselves. And I think that in the end will keep us, you know, I feel like artists are the ones who are bending that arc of the moral universe towards justice. We're the ones who are taking it and pulling it down and being like, justice. And we do that by by using our imaginations. We're gifted with this imagination of what the world could be, and why not fashion that world through our music?
Yeah. You've said it all, Joel Thompson. I'm such a mega fan. And I would just, I think, amplify a couple of things that I heard you say, Joel. One is that music is like this beautiful, pleasurable, transcendent system that we can enter together. Like that is such a wide door. And I have seen that when my role in it is often, I do have a sense of distance from the usefulness that I have in that system from myself as Moira, you know, and I now respect the journey between what I do as a useful musician and participating in this music, this system that we need. Like I think we need it. It's like I think it's like faith for a lot of us. It's so felt. And as long as we say, I need this feeling of connection. Do you need that feeling of connection? Okay, let's figure it out. Like, and just keep on reaching like that. And to say often like my identity as a woman, a person who's kind of in touch with folky stuff and history, you know, this identity that I've become in the world is not necessarily what I'm feeling inside, but it's still useful for me to play with that identity, and keep on showing up and being fearless about, yes, doing that crazy melody that I feel, doing that crazy, you know, thing that I heard as a 10-year-old, and go, does that really belong in a competent musical composition? Yes. And so yeah, that's where I'm at. And I think I hope people feel free to just surge back and forth between what feeds you and what you sort of see in the world as a connection, you to it.
Beautifully, beautifully, beautifully said. Again, both of you are so beautifully open. It is always, I think, a lesson in vulnerability, in the strength that lies there when I talk to both of you. These conversations are not easy, but they are needed. I think these are, you know, the conversations are about us and really how we stand in the way of ourselves. The closer we hold on to these identities that we have defined in our field and how we see ourselves in that field, whether being on the outside trying to go in, being the inside, maybe resisting moving from that space. Um, it seems like you both speak to what is true about why we do music in the first place. And if we can really center that, if we're going to talk about centering, let's center that. Let's center empathy and encouragement and understanding. That really will help us find ways intrinsically as human beings who like to connect and love each other as artists, especially, to find those connections and really create that just and equitable new sense of who we have always been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joel and Moira, thank you so much. I'm I'm really grateful. I'm feeling really stretched myself. So I'm this is great. I feel like I was hanging on everything you said, and yet I'm like I really need to go back and listen to this again, to catch
Me too.
everything. And thanks, Alex, as always, for co-hosting.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks. This is Rising Voices, and we'll see you next time. But before next time, if you want to get in touch, please continue these conversations. We want to keep the lines open. Bye-bye.